Okay guys, so for this section we are going to be talking about working with linear perspective and actually gridding a space. There's a couple things to really keep in mind. Again, always definitely make sure that you're going through the PowerPoints, look at those really well done examples. This is going to be just a quick demo on how to get your drawings started. Okay, it's not really based on anything that I'm observing right now. It's just a more kind of theoretical sort of start for your drawings. The main thing to remember about linear perspective is it's a set of guidelines. They're rules. They're rules to help you create the illusion of space, the illusion of depth. So when in doubt, when you are working with linear perspective and working from direct observation in that space, let those rules trump, let those rules tell you what to do with your drawing. Let them trump what you're observing. There's a couple things to really focus on when you're making a linear perspective drawing. There's three relationships that you really need to make sure that you're thinking about. And it all has to do with your eye line. So before you start drawing, ask yourself, where are my eyes in this space? If I'm sitting on the floor, my eyes are quite close to the floor. Maybe they are a quarter of the way from the floor to the ceiling. If that's the case, make sure, if your eyes are a quarter of the way from the floor to the ceiling in that space, you want to put your eye line about a quarter of the way from the bottom border to the top in your drawing. And as you're drawing the back wall, you want to make sure that the eye line is passing through the back wall about a quarter of the way from the bottom to the top. If you're halfway, like I'm standing in a space right now, my eye line is probably halfway from the floor to the ceiling. I would put my eye line on my drawing about halfway from the bottom to the top border, and also make sure that it's passing through my back wall about halfway from the bottom to the top of that back wall. Okay? Then lastly, ask yourself, am I in the center of this space? Am I over to the left? Am I over to the right? If you're over to the left, you want to put your vanishing point over to the left. That's going to give you more room to deal with the right side of that space, like you'd be seeing it in life. Okay, so let's imagine that we are just going to do a really sort of basic hallway drawing. Okay, I'm sitting on the floor. I realize, okay, maybe my eyes are about a third of the way from the floor to the ceiling. Okay, I want to find roughly 1/3 of my drawing, and this is going to be my eye line or horizon line. Okay, 1/3 from the bottom border to my eye line, 2/3 above. Again, my eyes are 1/3 of the way from the floor, 2/3 of the way to the ceiling. Let's say I'm sitting over to the left a bit, so I can see more of the right of that space. So I'll put my vanishing point to the left of center. Okay? I'm looking at this hallway. Maybe it's a pretty narrow hallway, so that back wall is maybe taller than it is wide. I can do some really basic measuring, find the proportions of that back wall. I figure out that it's slightly narrower than it is tall. So there's a couple things I want to make sure are happening with this back wall. Everything has to be consistent, okay? So notice, the vanishing point is to the left in the entire space of the drawing. The vanishing point is also to the left on that back wall. My eye line is about 1/3 of the way from the bottom border, 2/3 from the top, because my eyes are in the space that same kind of way. And I want to make sure that the same is happening with that back wall, okay? So that's these three correlations. Truly, if you can get to this point, your drawing is done, right? All of the work that happens from here is just sort of mechanical. This is the difficult part of making a perspective drawing. If, for instance, you say, I'm sitting on the floor, and I see that my eyes are 1/3 of the way from the floor to the ceiling. If you put your eye line up too high on the page, you're going to get a weird sort of space where the floor feels like it's swooping up. So again, just really make sure, double check that you are looking at those relationships. Then, from here, I've got my vanishing point, VP. The 4 major angles of that space come from that vanishing point through the corners of that back wall. And again, what this is going to give you is just really the sort of bones of your drawing. Okay, and this is the grid of that space, okay? Now anything that's happening on the walls, say for instance, maybe we have a set of lockers or something happening on these walls. Remember the tops of those lockers, as we're looking at that angle, would come to that vanishing point. Those lockers might come down because they're in front of the wall, so that bottom would be a little bit lower. I might have a window or a poster or something on this wall. Remember your verticals are always vertical. These horizontals then, again, will come from that angle, from that vanishing point. Okay? This starts to give you, again, a really basic sort of impression of a space in perspective. Now there's one last thing I'd like to show you guys. Again, let's imagine that we've got a row of lockers happening on this wall here. Anything that is equally spaced, that is diminishing or going back into space rhythmically, imagine you're standing on a street, looking down the street, and you've got street lights. They're the same distance apart, but as they're going away from you, they're getting smaller, and the space between them is shrinking. There's a way of actually making this happen. So what you want to do first is define that plane, which we've got here with the top of the locker line, the bottom of the locker line. The second thing you want to do is bisect that plane. Imagine that you take that plane and you fold it. So I'm going to find the halfway point of this plane, and I'm just going to take that from my vanishing point. Don't confuse this bisecting line, we call that B. Don't confuse that with your horizon line. Then you want to, and you can just kind of measure, you can eyeball it, you want to draw the first increment of whatever it is that you're working with. So again, maybe it's doors, maybe it's lockers, right? I'm looking at that back far locker, I'm looking at the distance, the depth between them, and I come up with something like so, all right? Now, in order to get these increasing in size coming forward rhythmically so that they feel like they're going back into perspective away from you naturally, what you do now, shoot a diagonal down from the top corner through the intersection of this front line and the bisecting line, and bring that down to that bottom edge. And this tells you where your next increment is happening. All right? And then the same thing repeats. Shoot another diagonal down from the previous vertical that you just drew. And that gives you your next increment. So you'll see, remember, these diagonals aren't going to be parallel. They're going to flare, they're going to kind of open up as they come closer to you. But you can see maybe there's panel on the wall or something. This is much larger, a little bit smaller, smaller still, smaller there. If you're doing lockers or windows or something that's smaller, tiles, lights, you want to make sure that that back increment, that first one, is really quite small. That way you're not opening up and getting too large too soon. Make sure that your verticals are true, good and vertical, parallel with your right and left borders. If not, you'll have weird leaning walls. Okay, use this to get started and then respond to the space in front of you for the specifics, for the particularities. Okay, good luck.